Okay, once again, I had a technical difficulty. I'm sorry. We're going to continue and pick up where we left off at in part 2. So the original name of Egypt is Kemet, and the Anglo-Saxons, Egyptologists, it was their contention that black land, which means that they were proposing that the soil was black and not the people. But it is clear that the individuals that lived there that described themselves as this is the land of the black, that we are a black people, and they depicted themselves, the iconography and the images showed that they were a melanated people, people with melanin in their skin. There's a long history of Egypt or Kemet with Greeks and Romans invading and ultimately taking over, and the Ptolemies in later years. But early on, in the first dynasties, you had Upper and Lower Kemet. The Nile River is the only river that I know. I can stand corrected. If anyone chooses to challenge me, you're welcome. That runs upward. Example, the Mississippi River flows down from Minnesota, St. Louis, Memphis, and Jeremiah's all through that direction and comes to the Gulf of Mexico. So the Nile River would flow upward. So Upper Kemet was at the bottom and Lower Kemet was at the top in that period. Upper Kemet and Lower Kemet became unified under the Pharaoh Menes. Menes the First, Menes. If you look at some of the imagery of Egypt, you will notice that there are two different crowns. One of the pins, if you go on Google and check some pictures, you will see one kind of looks like a bowling pin. The other is just a round, slanted crown. So to show that you are the ruler of unified Kemet, it was both of the crowns. The circular one with the bowling pin at the top. The word Pharaoh, we all should be familiar with that, means great house. It originally meant great house, that kings occupied a great house in life. And the word pyramid is a mispronunciation that was misscrewed by the Anglo-Saxons. This is what they use to describe it. But actually what it was initially called by the original inhabitants was Per-Mer. P-E-R-M-U-R. Per-Mer. House of death. Murder. Per-Mer. House of death. Yes, the pyramids are mausoleums, if you will, great structures for the pharaoh to enter into the afterlife. Okay? To enter into the afterlife. The pharaoh, the great house, the leader of the people. Again, I talked about monotheism and polytheism. In ancient Egypt, there was a belief in Upper and Lower Egypt in the sun god, Ra and Amun, when A-M-O-N and R-A, Ra. So when the entities unified, the same God of just a different name, because he had the same attributes, became Amun-Ra, the sun god. The sun was a symbol of a life giver. The sun is responsible for the nurturing and development of agriculture. We need sun. Melanated people interact with the sun. The sun is prevalent in cycles. It's a later lecture at a later time, but you have the winter solstice, the summer solstice, and also equinoxes. I want you to look that up on your own. And when I ask you in class, be able to tell me, what is an equinox? What is the winter solstice? What is the summer solstice? But the winter solstice is one that's very prevalent because it directly addresses December 25th and why that day is important. I go on the record and stand emphatically and say December 25th is not Jesus' so-called birthday. That's not what that means. Okay? So Egypt is divided chronologically into the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. And there were 28 Pharaohic dynasties, if I'm not mistaken. My mind, that kind of escapes me now, but I will have to come back to that. And this civilization, where they dwelled, was called the Nile Valley Civilization, or the Fertile Crescent. It was called that because the Nile Valley flooded seasonally, and it would make the soil so fertile and moist that there would be an abundance of agriculture and food provided for the people. As they were citizens, of course, as it grew under the rule of law, you had to have food provided. So as the population grew, population explosions, there were a greater need for food, and the Nile never let them down. I want to mention to you the book of Coming Forth by Day and Going Forth by Night, which is abbreviated or known by Egyptologists as the Book of the Dead, which is one of the first spiritual texts which existed probably about 10,000 years before any Bible was printed, whether it was the Gutenberg Bible, the King James, the Tyndale Bible. There are various Bibles, but you didn't get mass production of the Bible until you got the Gutenberg printing press, which enabled that to occur. That's another subject matter for another time. But the book of Coming Forth by Day and Going Forth by Night was not just a simple book that was a book of myths per se, but it addressed what happens to the soul at death and the belief in an afterlife. The ancient Kemites were one of the first societies that was predicated upon the belief that the soul at death was judged and that there was a final resting place based on how you lived your life. This is before so-called Christianity, if you will, but if you look at the underline, the underbelly of it, you will see that theoretically it's similar to what is now called Christianity. As Dr. John Henry Clarke said, that Christianity is a recycling of religious beliefs that was prevalent and has its genesis in Africa, that was recycled and given back to you to assist in your enslavement. That's a powerful remark, Dr. John Henry Clarke. So the Book of the Dead talks about this, the afterlife, and the judgment by the feather of Mayat, living by the principles of balance and justice. Mayat, M-A-A-T. Powerful concept. And the story goes that upon the day of judgment, that the soul of the person coming before Mayat would be weighed with a pair of scales, like the Statue of Liberty symbolically holding the scales and being blindfolded. But Mayat would weigh the heart with the feather of justice. If you look up Mayat, Google it, M-A-A-T, you will see Mayat placing the feather of justice and righteousness with the heart. And if the heart was heavier than the feather, you were found wanting. Thus you get terms like black heart, dark hearted, cold hearted, heavy hearted. It has its origins with and connections to Maya. So that was the origins of heaven and hell, and these were some of the just a few of the contributions that the Egyptians were allowed to, were not allowed, but brought forth to mankind. Egyptian life centered around family. There's an abundance of documents about Egyptian life, but for the most part, the Egyptians were farmers and workers, but they had a hierarchy, a social construct, social hierarchies, which started with the Pharaoh. As I said, Pharaoh means great house, and it is believed that the Pharaoh is descended from deity. God on earth, God present, the God King. This is what was believed early, that the divinity lives within the Pharaoh, not as if he was able to have a spooky demonstration of power, like throw a lightning bolt, but it is believed that he was a direct descendant and that God operated through him as if he was a representative of Amun-Ra on earth. The self-created God, the sun God. He, and there's others. There's the God Ptah, P-T-A-H, the God who created himself from nothingness, from the primordial waters of Noon. We'll get deeper into that as well. So I talked a little bit about how the ancient Kemites looked. They were a black people, but one initial invasion that occurred was the Hyksos, and they were called the Sea People by the Kemites. They were a Indo-European language-speaking people, and they came in and ravaged and attacked ancient Kemet. The Hyksos invasions occurred during the Bronze Era. Now you have the Bronze Era and you have the Iron Era. The Iron Era was second and brought about a stronger weapon, as we know that iron is stronger than bronze, but steel is stronger than iron, and iron can what? Rust. Steel can't rust. Okay? But steel is made from iron ore. So the Hyksos, these sea people, came in and introduced horse-drawn carriages, which was an advance from weaponry early on. You see the images of a chariot being pulled by the horse. You're able to shoot a bow and arrow swiftly. You're able to not have to get so close to the person you're combating. So this was one of the things that the Hyksos brought in. Similarly, I mentioned the Indo-Europeans, and this is where we're going to stop at, but a lot of us have seen, know who King Tut is, King Tutankhamun, the boy king. He has to be one of the most famous individuals from Egyptian lore because his grave burial mass was found intact. And you see the attention to detail with the mask, the burial mask of King Tutankhamun. So I mentioned Indo-European languages. And Indo-European languages are languages that is a language family that includes ancient Greek, Latin, Persian, Sanskrit, and Hindi. We'll talk more about the Aryans and the Vedic age in chapter 3. This is chapter 2. So the Bronze Age collapsed around 1200 BCE. As I said, we've done away, if you will, with BC and AD, before Christ and after death, and you use CE, Common Era, or before the Common Era. So 1200 years before, historians say that the Bronze Age began to collapse. The Bronze Age is when weapons, cups and medallions and jewelry ornamentations were made from bronze, which is a pretty strong element. For those of you that may not know, bronze kind of resembles brass. But iron was stronger. So the Iron Age began about 1100 BCE. Okay? So catch that chronology. The Bronze Age collapsed around 1200 BCE. Historians consider that as a major turning point. And according to the book, it says that the Iron Age began around 1100 BCE, 100 years later. This is where we'll stop at. This is what we were going to address today. Continue to look at the chapter and the information. We will talk about the Phoenicians, the Hebrews, and those other people that I mentioned. And we will talk about the difference in a Hebrew, the original Hebrew, Jewish, Zionism, and the religion of Judaism as it relates to where it came from and who the Hebrews were, where they came from, and talk about some biblical accounts as well as some historical accounts about their journey through life. And we're going to talk about Persia. And that's basically going to be the end of chapter 2, and we're going to run right on into chapter 3. Remember, always investigate the information you receive. If it is indeed the truth, it should stand the test of investigation. Peace.